So over the last few sessions, I've been using this as a definition of lean. So the central idea is to provide more value to your customer while minimizing waste and creating processes that use fewer resources to provide the products and services. So frequently you say, okay, where do I start? This is sounds like there's some good things here that could help me. So where do I start? And really the place that you start is at the greatest point of need. And so frequently what I find the greatest point of need is in basic stability. So before I jump into basic stability, I'm going to run through a quick list of steps of a typical progression of a lean transformation of a value stream. So usually the first thing you want to do is to make the process flow, and then you want to pace the work to takt time, and takt time is just a Japanese word for the customer demand. And then you want to develop pull systems, and the last step is balance and level the process. So what is basic stability? We were talking a little bit about that. Process elements have general predictability and consistent availability. So last session, I was talking about processes, and so part of processes are process elements, and there's 5 of them. So there's man, machine, materials, methods, and environment. And so I'm going to step through those, and we can ask the question of what does basic stability look like for each of those process elements. How do you know if you have enough stability to make it flow? Do you have enough trained employees available to handle the current processes? Next thing, so there's man, machine, so you can think about that as equipment or tools. Do you have enough material on hand every day to meet your production needs? Do you have work methods documented and standard work in place? And the last one regarding arrangement and orderliness of the physical environment, and it can actually be like org chart related as well. So manpower stability, the first one. So we had the question, do you have enough trained employees available to handle the current processes? Basic stability starts with well-trained people. And it really is all about people there. And that's not just the employees, supervisors as well. Supervisor, manager is a specific job and task and is a different skill set than actually performing the work. All right, respect for people, which is one of the pillars of lean. So when we're talking about trained employees, if you don't have basic respect for people, you're going to have this rotating door. Like you're saying, if you're making an investment in people, you need to treat them appropriately. So question to ask, do your employees have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to perform? And then another question we typically don't think about, but do the employees understand the expected behaviors and norms? All right, so kind of the first thing to take a look at is manpower stability. Next on the list is machine. So again, the question, do you have enough machine uptime to produce customer demand? So there's actual and theoretical capacity. So the machine specs or equipment or whatever, you say it can do X, but are you actually getting that? Are you scheduling for the theoretical? So if it's supposed to do 100 a day and you're actually getting 70 and the customer demand is 80, you have a problem. So in a lot of small businesses, maybe we're not using the same level of equipment that you'd have in a manufacturing environment. So kind of throw in their software communication systems, Yeah. So next, material stability. So do you have enough material on hand every day to meet your production needs? And you could substitute production in there for whatever your product or service. So typically in the lean world, we consider inventory as waste. And I'm just kind of throwing this in here that not all inventory is waste. Inventory is actually the grease that makes the process flow. And in some cases, you may need to add inventory at certain process steps. Kind of this is getting if you haven't yet got to the point where in the sequence of order of events of the transformation, where you've gotten to the last step of balance and level processes, if one process step takes 4 hours and the next process step takes an hour, you may need to buffer that with inventory to actually make it flow in the short term. Right. So if inventory is actually making the process meet the customer demand, you may want to do that in the short term, is really what I think most people familiar with lean go, yeah, inventory is bad, we want to reduce it. But if you pull too much inventory out, it's like starving the system and you'll actually get a lower throughput. It would be better to have a little bit more inventory in the system and be able to meet customer demand than the other way around. You're always going to need a certain amount of inventory, and then the lean tools will help you reduce that, but how you do it is you actually change the process so you don't need it and you earn the right to eliminate the inventory. I kind of threw these in here as kind of that counter thought process of sometimes in order to get the process stable, you actually need to add a little bit of inventory, and then you can come back and say, okay, how do I make this flow? What do I need to do to actually get rid of the inventory and make a more lean process? So in the office environment, this is typically what I see is, did I get all of the information up front that I actually need to complete the process step? Or do I see myself having to loop back to the customer to get there? So this, I'm kind of throwing that in with the material because in an office or a white collar type process, information or data is usually the material. So the next one, method stability. You have the work methods documented and standard work in place. So in the last session, I talked about standard work, and so that's you have a process documented and you're following it. So kind of the step before that is a standard. That means you've documented the process. Standard work means that you documented and you followed it. And then there's a lean term that is called standard operations, which is you have the process documented, you're following it, and it's balanced and leveled to the customer demand. So you could have standard work, it's documented and followed, but it's not meeting the customer demand. It's not, you could have a great process, but it's just not meeting the customer demand. And right now in the business cycle, we're kind of in the growth phase. We haven't quite hit the top of the market yet. So people are having capacity issues, and so your current process, you may have a good current process for a year ago, but now you've grown, you got more customers, that you may need to do something different. Basic work instructions are kind of examples of standard work process documentation, which is usually a little bit more formal. It includes the sequence and how long it should take, and then the last one, set in stone versus change. So standard, from the lean perspective, means like a measuring stick. And it's what you measure against. If you want to improve or change the process, you measure it against the standard that's in place. And if it's better, then you adopt that as the new standard. So lean thinking would say that you're continuously improving or changing the process. So the standard isn't set in stone, and that's just, one and done is not the idea here. It's just kind of a measuring stick for the next improvement. All right, environmental stability. Do you have arrangement and orderliness in your environment? So now we kind of, I put the typical 5S and visual controls, and coming from larger companies with Lean, you're probably familiar with those, what those are. But these would be future topics to deep dive a little bit more into workplace layout when talking about measures and metrics associated with your process. So again, when we're looking at basic stability, you're saying, hey, do we have these basics in place so that we can kind of move to the next step and make the process flow? So with your business, what's your greatest need, and do you have basic stability?